The year is 1943. For a young German soldier captured in the sands of North Africa, the journey ends here, a train platform somewhere in the American heartland. His entire life, propaganda had painted a clear picture of the enemy, a degenerate nation, starving, on the verge of collapse. He expects a brutal prison, contempt, and hunger. Instead, he's handed a tray. On it, soft white bread, a portion of meat, and a cup of real, hot coffee, more than he's seen in years of fighting. The world Goebbels built for him is crumbling. He was trained to face a monster. But what was this? His experience was no accident. It was the opening move in one of the war's most audacious and secret psychological experiments, bringing nearly 400,000 German prisoners of war onto American soil. The central question was a monumental gamble. Could you denazify an enemy army? And what would the attempt reveal about America itself? This question wasn't just theoretical. By May 1943, it had become a logistical crisis. The surrender of the Afrika Korps left the Allies with over 275,000 Axis prisoners. Britain, with its supply lines under constant threat from German U-boats, was too risky a destination. The only viable option was 4,000 miles across the Atlantic, the United States. This unprecedented influx sparked a fierce, hidden debate within the Roosevelt administration. For the War Department, the mission was driven by cold pragmatism. Their primary concern was the fate of American POWs held by Germany. Strict adherence to the Geneva Convention, humane treatment, adequate food, proper housing was a strategic necessity, an insurance policy for their own men, nothing more. But a small, obscure unit saw a different path. Tucked away in the Provost Marshal General's office, the Special Projects Division argued that simply containing the enemy was a monumental waste. They envisioned the camps not as prisons, but as a vast re-education enterprise, a chance to dismantle Nazi ideology, one mind at a time. This was a radical, almost secret program, operating on a shoestring budget and against a public demanding retribution, not rehabilitation. Its architects knew they couldn't start with lessons on democracy. Before they could re-educate a mind, they first had to break through its defenses. And the first crack in that psychological armor would appear in the most unexpected of places. The first blow came not from a lecture hall, but from the American economy itself. The Geneva Convention stipulated that enlisted prisoners could work for pay. Soon, convoys of German POWs were heading out to farms, canneries, and lumber mills, filling critical labor shortages. They earned 80 cents a day, paid in camp scrip they could spend at the post exchange, or PX. And there, on the shelves, the entire narrative of Nazi propaganda collapsed. Coca-Cola, Lucky Strike cigarettes, Hershey's chocolate, copies of Life and the Saturday Evening Post, their glossy pages filled with images of a confident, prosperous nation. This wasn't an argument, it was a transaction. For a soldier raised on tales of a starving, degenerate America, the simple act of buying a soda was a profound, undeniable refutation. But this quiet revelation was only the beginning. The Special Projects Division was now preparing to move from economic reality to a direct assault on ideology, turning the camps into a battlefield for the mind. The assault on ideology began quietly, not with a command, but with a newspaper. In select camps, a new publication appeared, Der Ruf, or The Call. Printed in German, it initially looked like any other camp newsletter, with sports scores and local news. But slowly, its content shifted. It began publishing uncensored reports from the battlefronts, reports that starkly contradicted the optimistic news from home. Then came articles by German intellectuals, essays on American democracy, and excerpts from books that had been burned and banned by the Third Reich. Soon, the books themselves appeared in camp libraries. Thomas Mann, Erich Maria Remarque, Stefan Zweig. For the first time in a decade, these soldiers had access to a world of ideas their own government had declared toxic. For those willing, university-level courses were organized, teaching English, U.S. history, and the mechanics of constitutional government. This was the intellectual offensive. But the most fervent Nazis inside the wire saw this not as education, but as poison. They fought back. In camps across the country, an unofficial Camp Gestapo emerged. These were hardline non-commissioned officers and party loyalists who enforced ideological purity through terror. They compiled lists of traitors, men who attended classes, read forbidden books, or were deemed too friendly with their American guards. Intimidation escalated to beatings. Secret tribunals, known as Femgerichte, were held. At Camp Tonkawa, Oklahoma, in November 1943, a group of Nazi enforcers accused Corporal Johannes Kunz of being an informant. They staged a mock trial, beat him unconscious, and left him to die. The message was clear: ideological surrender would be punished by death. The American experiment was on the verge of failure, sabotaged from within. Faced with this internal war, the Provost Marshal General's office made a pivotal decision. If they couldn't win over the fanatics, they would remove them. In early 1944, they launched a massive, top-secret screening program to segregate the entire POW population. Every single prisoner was interviewed and classified: ardent Nazi, anti-Nazi, or, the vast majority, simply apolitical. It was a colossal logistical undertaking. Tens of thousands of men identified as hardcore ideologues, the blacklist, were systematically transferred to high-security camps, most notably a formidable facility in Alva, Oklahoma. Conversely, confirmed anti-Nazis, the whites, were concentrated in camps where the re-education program could proceed without fear. The gray mass of neutrals remained, but now the reign of terror was broken. With the fanatics isolated, the program entered a new phase, moving from the classroom to the community. Work details on farms and in forests now fostered unprecedented human contact. In the fields of the Midwest and the orchards of the West, German soldiers worked alongside American families. Memoirs from both sides recount the slow, awkward thaw. Prisoners invited to share lunch on a farmhouse porch, discovering that the enemy was a farmer worried about his crops. American children, initially fearful, beginning to play with the strange men who spoke a different language. For the POWs, this was propaganda's final death blow. The monstrous, subhuman Ami from Goebbels' newsreels was replaced by a real person who offered them a glass of water, asked about their family, and treated them with simple dignity. By isolating the ideologues, the Americans had created a space where a different future could be imagined. But just as these prisoners were being taught the principles of American liberty, they were about to become first-hand witnesses to its deepest and most painful contradiction. The lesson in American liberty took a dark turn in the segregated South, where many camps were located. Here, prisoners became first-hand witnesses to an unsettling social order. Their own African-American guards, soldiers in the U.S. Army, were often treated with less dignity than the prisoners themselves. On trains, German POWs would be served meals in the dining car, while their black guards were relegated to the kitchen. Prisoners recorded their disbelief in diaries, struggling to comprehend a system where they, the enemy, were granted privileges denied to a citizen in uniform. This glaring hypocrisy was a powerful counter-argument to the American ideal. But as the war in Europe raced towards its end, the U.S. was about to deploy a weapon of truth so shocking it would eclipse all contradictions. In May 1945, that weapon of truth was deployed. Across the country, German prisoners were ordered into camp auditoriums, many of which they had built themselves. They didn't know what to expect. Then, the projectors whirred to life. On screen was not Hollywood, but hell. The first official newsreel footage from the liberated concentration camps of Buchenwald, Dachau, and Bergen-Belsen. Camp reports document a cataclysm of shock. Men who had faced down tanks now wept openly. Others shouted in rage and denial, screaming that it was fake, another American trick. But most were simply frozen, staring in stony, catatonic silence. In those few minutes, the final, most cherished illusion was annihilated: the myth that they were honorable soldiers fighting a clean war. These films did not answer every question, nor did they absolve anyone, but they destroyed the central lie. The war was over. And now, the question that first arose on that railroad platform in the American heartland had to be faced. What had this entire experience achieved? The answer came in a secret, post-war U.S. military survey. The results were startling. 74% of former prisoners reported their time in America gave them a more favorable view of democracy. This was not Americanization. They returned to a ruined Germany not as converts, but as witnesses. They had seen an imperfect, contradictory, but real alternative to the ideology that had destroyed their world. Many of these men became quiet but essential figures in building a new, democratic West Germany, their experience an anchor against the past. In the war for the German mind, America's most effective weapon turned out to be not a bomb, but a demonstration of its own complicated, imperfect, and undeniable humanity.